In today's episode, something different for a change, talking to Geraldine Deruiter, an author, a James Beard Award-winning author, whose new book, If You Can't Take the Heat, comes out in March. This is the book, which you can find just by Googling it. Geraldine, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
And tell me more about who you are besides what's in the official bio.
I am someone who probably, like a lot of people, has made their career on the internet. But I started like a million years ago. So I am a writer who started their career blogging, really. And so what happened is way back in 2008, I used to work for a toy and game company called Cranium. Have you ever heard of it? Have you ever played it? Okay, yeah, a lot of people have. I got laid off and I started kind of floating aimlessly for a while. And that led to the start of my blog, which is called Everywhereist. So it's everywhereist.com. And so I was travel blogging for years, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And very slowly that morphed into my first book, which I still don't know how this happened. People ask me, I'm like, I don't know. I was just writing for years. And after a while, I realized that this funky side project that I was working on became my career. Right before COVID, I started writing more and more about food. So I thankfully and accidentally pivoted. And so what I realized was the posts that were getting the most engagement and the posts that were doing the best and the posts that I was kind of the best at writing were all food related. And at that point, I thought, well, maybe there's something here. So after a couple weird instances where I went crazy viral, made like international headlines, found my face on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, like just crazy things like that, I ended up pitching my second book, which is about food and feminism.
Gotcha. And I assume this is one of those.
That is kind of the start of all of it. Yes. So the pizza roll or the pizza dough cinnamon rolls from Mario Batali. So that blog post went up, oh my gosh, 6 years ago. But time is a thief. So I wrote this blog post, and what happened was, I feel like people probably know the story, but Mario Batali, there were some allegations that came out about sexual harassment. Turns out they were way worse than that. There were actually a couple of lawsuits. A lot was happening. So at the time, all we knew were about the allegations. And he sends this newsletter out to his fans, and there's like this very structured PR apology that clearly his legal team has gone through that says nothing. And at the end of it, he includes a recipe for cinnamon rolls. And he says, they're a fan favorite, make them for the holidays, because it came out in December. And everyone was like, what are you doing? It's like you brought baked goods to your own trial. Like, this is just such a bad idea. And the one thing I noticed no one had done, and the thing that immediately came to mind for me, was to make the recipe. And part of the reason why was because I had made his pizza dough before, and I knew that there was no way that this would make a good cinnamon roll. Like, this is not, the dough is totally different. There's no way this was going to work. And if we want to get into nerdy food science, pizza dough is very bread-like. And cinnamon rolls are usually, if they're good, in my opinion, have like more of a brioche texture. So the two are not, you can't substitute one for the other. So I made the cinnamon rolls, and this was kind of at the apex of the Me Too movement. And I wove kind of two narratives together, kind of about my rage, about everything that was happening, and all of these emerging stories that were coming out, and this recipe that was just utter crap. So it goes crazy viral. Martha Stewart is retweeting it. Dan Savage is retweeting it. Pete Wells, who's the restaurant reviewer of the New York Times, is sharing it. By the way, this is back when Twitter is not a cesspool that is slowly dying. And so it's everywhere. My blog crashes from traffic. I get like millions of visitors over a few days. I'm getting, I'm doing interviews with like the local news. It's bonkers. My website gets hacked. And then a year later, I win a James Beard Award for it. What? Like what? So yeah, that I don't know. It's still bizarre to me. I say it out loud. I'm like, I have a James, like my husband and I will go to James Beard award winning restaurants and we're like, psh, they give those to anybody. So yeah. So that's kind of how that all started.
Gotcha. So the new book is called Tales of Food, Feminism, and Fury.
Yes.
How do you, and this is probably a very philosophical start, how do you define feminism?
Oh gosh. I mean, I define feminism as, first of all, the radical belief that women are people and that they deserve equality and have not always received it. And, of course, I believe that feminism should be intersectional. And so if you add on layers to that, if you are a woman of color, you have also dealt with racism on top of sexism. And so your experience is different and you've dealt with a lot more. Or if you are a woman who is dealing with disability and a world that does not accommodate that, then there are more layers to it. If you are a woman who is trans, you are dealing with transphobia in the world. So there's so many layers to it.
Gotcha. Okay. And so what was the impetus to turn this into a book? Why a book about this particular topic?
I felt like these stories kept presenting themselves. And it was very organic. It had been years since I had written a book. My first book came out in I think it came out in 2017, and this book is coming out 7 years later. And to be honest, I didn't know what my second book was going to be. And I didn't really have plans to write a second one. But after the second article I wrote went viral and it was about food and it was hitting all these same notes, I thought, okay, this is too powerful an intersection of topics to avoid, really. And so I think that there is something here. And I talked to my agent about it and I was like, I don't know if I'm the right person to write this. And I remember she said to me, no, I think you're exactly the right person who should write this. And I thought, okay, but I'm doing it my way, which is probably not how other people are going to do it. So I'm going to talk about my love of Red Lobster, and I'm going to use a lot of swears, and it's going to be completely all over the place. And she was like, that's okay.
Okay. When you look at the food landscape now, particularly when we have, for example, YouTubers who have millions of people in their audience on things, do you feel like the food industry has gotten better or worse, or specific to feminism?
In like, since when?
Since the cinnamon roll incident.
Since the cinnamon roll incident. Maybe. Tough to say. I want to say it's getting better. There's a very hopeful part of me that wants to say it's getting better. I am not a consumer, an avid consumer of YouTube. I believe I follow two channels, and one is Taylor Lawrence's channel, and the other is The Rock's channel. And I don't know how that came about. So I can't speak to the YouTube landscape. I will say that in my feeds, I do feel like I am seeing voices and, women and people who have not historically been heard before.
Okay.
So that's cool.
And in terms of the culinary industry itself, particularly the big names, how do you see that having evolved since then? When you look at, in the post Mario Batali world, and who even gets the spotlight these days?
It's slowly starting to shift, but I mean, historically, let's be clear, it's always been men, right? You think of celebrity chefs, and who comes to mind for you? Who's I think of a celebrity chef.
The first oldest one is Julia Child.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Is that
but in the
who comes to mind first?
so in the current generation, it for me, it is there's Rachel Ray, there's Gordon Ramsay, there is who's that crazy one? Oh, there's Alton Brown, who
Uh-huh.
is not necessarily a chef per se.
But he's a
Um,
culinary person. He's a
he's a
culinary
culinary personality,
personality. Yeah.
right? There is Bobby Flay.
Mhm.
There's Kat Cora, who is Bobby Flay's opponent on Iron Chef.
Yeah.
So there's but a lot of my culinary knowledge is based a lot of basically on online content like YouTube and various shows.
Well, and also like early 2000s Food Network. Yeah. Which was, quite predominantly male dominated. And like
Mhm.
if you ask, that's where a lot of my references come from too. So if you ask me, like, I don't like him. I think he's very abusive, but Gordon Ramsay is the first one. I don't know why. He's just so culturally saturated everywhere. Like he is who comes to mind when I think of celebrity chefs, or celebrities in the culinary industry. Interestingly, like Martha Stewart is a huge name, right? But she's not, she's almost like this more broad lifestyle brand. So we don't exclusively associate her with the culinary world. Anthony Bourdain, comes to mind too, but again, he was almost like beyond just food. So it's interesting because I think historically, the thing that I write about in my book is that men were allowed to be great chefs and women were allowed to be great cooks.
Hmm.
And that division is something that has been reflected in both where the division of labor of who gets to cook in the home or who is assigned cooking responsibility in the home. The vast majority of home cooking falls to women, and that's in heterosexual couples who are married, who are not married, who have kids, who don't. It's almost 70 to 80% of the cooking falls to women, and almost 70% of the grocery shopping falls to women. So the vast majority of cooking within the home is happening with women, and that's regardless of whether or not they are working outside of the home. So you might think, well, maybe they're stay-at-home moms. No, you have a job outside the home, you are still doing the majority of the cooking. So that was one thing that struck me. It was like, all right, if you're a woman, you're expected to cook in the home. But then you look at who is allowed to be a successful celebrity chef. And the vast majority, hold on, I actually wrote it down because it was in the book, but there was no way I was going to remember the stat. Since the Michelin star system started in 1941, more than 100 male chefs have been awarded the 3-star rating, and less than 6 female chefs have been. So if you look at where, who gets to be awarded and who gets to be lauded, it's all men. Time Magazine did a piece called the I think Gods of Cooking a while back, and the cover was just 3 male chefs. I don't think there were any there were any women chefs on it at all. There were like a few noted women who were in the culinary industry, but not predominantly chefs. So, we're seeing, if you're a man, you can be praised for cooking outside of the home, but if you're a woman, it doesn't happen the same way.
Why is there such a division of labor that's so imbalanced if you have the cultural role models for cooking are men? Why isn't that reflected then in the home and who does the cooking?
I mean, I think that the answer to that is cultural and sociological and economical. It is so layered. But I think that in order, part of it is, I think, in order for our society to work, uh, someone needs to do a lot of cooking at home. That needs to happen, right? And historically, because that's fallen to women, that has been devalued. And it's fallen to women because, we literally were not allowed to work outside of the home. We couldn't have our own income. We couldn't have our own bank accounts. So you have this responsibility within the home that fell to women. And if you think about it, there was no other way for that to work. You couldn't eat out every day. People couldn't afford to hire an in-home chef. You had to have someone making food and doing all of that labor. And it just got completely ignored. It is completely invisible labor that is happening. I think once it started happening outside of the home, the original, like some of the first restaurants were rigidly structured, like based on military structure. And it was a very masculine environment. And so it was seen as such. And because of that, it was not a woman's place. Once the work started to be appreciated and lauded and you got money for it, it became the domain of men. So that is, part of it. And I'm not including any nuance there. Like that's the broad overarching way in which I think it happened. There's more to it because there have been women cooking outside of the home and struggling and trying to make a name for themselves. And there are, the Julia Childs out there who were kind of changing the landscape. But broadly, this is what I think is the logic behind all of it.
Do you see that changing generationally? If so,
Absolutely.
how?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, first of all, I think, we're, especially these newer generations are kind of abandoning these old ideas of men do this and women do that. Like, God bless Harry Styles for his idea that there is no men's and women's clothing, right? Bless him, bless the young kids for this. My niece uses bro as a gender neutral term. So I do think that they are understanding that. And I think that, the world has changed. It's okay for men to cook. Like we no longer, it used to be seen as this emasculating thing. And that's part of it too, right? You have to remember the patriarchy hurts everyone. Like men are treated like crap for loving to bake or loving to cook or, being nurturing in the home. And that's, like, historically, that's terrible. That's been terrible. That's been a disservice to families. It's been a disservice to women. It's been a disservice to men. So that's all starting to change. And I think, obviously women are getting more recognition outside of the home too. So when they cook. And so we're seeing women chefs being celebrated, and we're seeing non-binary chefs being celebrated. We're seeing less of this rigid structure around gender in general. So yeah, I definitely do see things changing, but anytime stuff starts to change, you see a backlash. That's how society moves forward, I hope. I hope that's what's happening.
Talk about that. What backlash have you seen so far, and which direction is it headed?
Oh God. I mean, I don't, I'm speaking about this broadly and beyond just the culinary world. But, I think we see, like, the entire state of Florida would be my current example. I think that there's all this beautiful literature out there for kids about how it's okay to be trans, it's okay to be queer, it's okay if your family looks different than other families, and people are banning these books. Like, anytime that books are getting banned, I think you need to be like, okay, hold on. hold on. Like maybe we need to take a minute, a beat, and just stop. Everybody stop. So I think that, I think that that's what we're seeing. I think that so many people are just so afraid and so hateful, and they could not handle that the world was changing, and in my opinion becoming this like wonderful, more inclusive place. And so they are holding on so desperately to what they thought it was, and violently trying to shut out everything else. And that sucks. And I honestly hope that that is not how things keep going.
One of the things that has become apparent is there's a lot of people, again, particularly on social media, in both in the food realm and generally, who are operating with not generally accepted procedures. For example, there's a channel called Cooking with Jack, in which the person cooks some chicken in one of those food service bags, and cooks.
What do you mean food serve? Like a sous vide bag, or?
No, it's like an oven bag, like you've seen
Oh,
for
okay.
Thanksgiving at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Reynolds.
yeah. Okay.
So he cooks a whole chicken at 375
Okay.
for 40 minutes from a cold start oven, and pulls it at 40 minutes and serves it. It is still red on the inside, and he's like, "This is what you want your chicken to be. It's so tender and moist." And that's raw. And yet the video's gotten millions of views.
Because everyone's horrified, right?
But when you read some of the comments, people are like, "I'm gonna try that. That looks great." And we're like,
No.
like that looks great if you want to go to the hospital. But there's a lot of really bad food out there that is incredibly popular. And I want to hear your thoughts as someone who's in the culinary world about how the industry as a whole is reacting to people. These are regular people with enormous followings making stuff that is legitimately dangerous.
So there's two paths here. I think there's two different things. There is trash food, right? There is the trashy food, which to me like is the Taco Bell taco with the Doritos shell, right? Or I believe that there was maybe a Domino's pizza with hot dogs in the crust or something like that. And maybe I imagine that might be a fever dream. I'm going to go invent that and get 1 billion followers on YouTube. There's trash food. And that I always feel like is a little bit like you're in college or you're in your early 20s and you're drunk and you know what seems like a great idea to eat. And that's okay, right? That's fine. That's fun. And I think we all love to look at that. And everybody's like, that looks gross, but I kind of want to try it. And that's like, I don't know, that's the equivalent of going to see a bad action film. Like, everybody likes that. In small doses, I think that's okay. Everything, like the Epicureans literally had the philosophy of everything in moderation, including moderation. But then you have people who are they are literally endangering other people's lives and their own. And they are a public menace. Do you have a solution? You must have a solution.
I mean, in some ways, it's sort of a self-solving problem.
Oh, God. They're just going to take themselves out.
I am an ardent fan of science and data and facts.
Same.
This is generally how I view life. I don't have much of a political orientation because I tend to go with whoever has correct data on the thing is generally the way I tend to lean.
I would say that is a political orientation these days, but
everything is, and that's a whole other topic.
We could talk about that, yeah.
But particularly when it comes to things like food science and medicine in general, there's a lot of people who ardently reject science in general, food science in specific. And for the general public, it's not clear to a lot of people what is and is not good food science. Like, for example, if you read about people hawking all these different supplements.
Yeah.
To the uneducated consumer, it sounds plausible. It's like when you watch one of these food celebrities, the food sort of I would call grassroots celebrities, as opposed to the media personalities.
Yeah.
What they're doing sounds plausible, even if it is completely and totally wrong and deeply unsafe.
Right. Yeah, no, and I do think we are going to get into this is a very broad-reaching societal problem, right? We could start digging into it. I see this a lot, and this is a running gag with my friends and I, because ignoring my office, I am a neat freak. And I clean with real cleaners. I use disinfectants and clean properly. But then I like to spray essential oils because I like how they smell. But people will see essential oils in your home, and then they're like, "Do you think this is medicine?" And I'm like, "No, I do not." I think medicine is medicine. I think lavender smells nice, and I want it to be in my home. So I think fundamentally what it comes down to is a breakdown of education, right? We don't educate people. We don't educate people properly in food science. And if you look at people's intent, their intent is to inform themselves. They're watching these videos, they're doing something that they think is correct. They're like, well, that's, I always had dry chicken. This chicken is like tender and moist. That's a great idea. And nobody's telling them, actually, like, you need to cook it to this temperature to kill the bacteria, because there is, and that's not the case with beef. That is the case with pork. These are the meats that you can eat rare. These are the ones you can't. Sushi grade fish you can eat raw. Non-sushi grade fish, which most fish is, you have to cook. And explaining that, people they're not informed of these things. And so that is, that's something that we have not taught people. And I don't know, that's not part of standard education. I think beyond that, we don't really teach critical thinking. And I think a lot of times, there is a cost. There is kind of a punitive cost to pushing back. And it could be societally, it could be anything. But if you're the one person at the party who's like, bro, your chicken's raw and everyone else is eating it, like, you're such a killjoy, like, you're no fun, we'll put it back because somebody wants their chicken well done. Like, what? Like, so there's so many layers to this, and it spreads, right? It's everywhere. Also, I do think that there is a discussion here to be had about how, if we had socialized medicine, that would stop people from trying to cure a lot of their illnesses with pseudoscience. And a lot of that goes to eating or doing weird things with food that are fundamentally unhealthy. So Gwyneth Paltrow, I'm looking at you because I know you have good healthcare, and your whole bone broth 3 times a day instead of eating to try and help with your long COVID is not okay because other people are doing that. No, girl, no. Still mad about that. We can talk about that.
I was going to say, long COVID is a vascular issue with cytokine inflammation. How is bone broth supposed to help that?
So supposedly the diet she was on was supposed to be an anti-inflammatory diet. And so that would help with the inflammation of... It's not real. So
there's very specific cytokines that are involved in this, and
it's not real. I mean, what she's doing does not effectively help, right? So if you're asking me to explain the science of it, I'm like, well, I think she thought this. Like, I think she thought that reducing doing a low inflammation diet, which I think is like, no carbs, no dairy, only bone broth would help. But yeah,
I feel like that falls in the category of please see your doctor.
I agree.
Okay. So in the book, talk about some of the other interesting, fury-inducing things that made it into the book that are worth sharing.
So one thing that has happened several times now, it hasn't happened in the US, but it's happened a few times while we were traveling in Europe, is I've gone to a couple restaurants, fancier places like Michelin-starred places. And I'm not that, clearly I'm not that person. I will eat anywhere. I will eat at any location. I do not need fine dining because a lot of times I find fine dining is meh, fine. But we've gone to these restaurants and I will be handed a menu that has no prices on it. And it is like being untethered from reality. And I grew up in such a way, and I suspect you did too. Can you order food without knowing how much things cost?
I mean, it depends on the restaurant. If
Right?
it's a prefix, then you know what you're getting. But
Right.
if it is a menu that's absent that date, it's like, so did you make a misprint?
Right?
What happened here?
So I just like to know. It helps inform my decision. And if I'm going to speak bluntly, odds are I'm never going to eat at a restaurant where I literally could not afford the food. That's not going to happen. I will not find that restaurant. I would not enter that place. But these are relics of another time. These are women's menus, and they are designed without prices, and the men are given menus with prices.
Ah,
And so the understanding is because the lady, air quotes, is not paying, she should not know how much anything costs. And so we went to one of these restaurants and I was like, I would like some water. And they were like, okay. And they brought me a water menu. And I'm like, I would just want tap water. And they were basically like, we don't have that. Here's the water menu. And that is how we ended up spending, I want to say $53 on water. And I am still angry about that because it had no prices. I didn't know what I was doing. So that still pisses me off. That angers me to no end. Like, give everyone menus with prices.
that is bizarre because you can't, if you don't have that data, then you can't know like the quality of something you're ordering, like a $5 bottle of wine versus like a $50 bottle of wine.
Well, and the assumption is that if you are a solo diner, if you're a solo female or female presenting diner, you receive a menu with prices. Yeah.
Okay. That does seem a bit on the very outdated side of things.
It very much is. This is literally a relic from a time when women were not allowed to go out unescorted. So the assumption was you would never be dining alone, and you would never carry your own money because you would what? No, that's something unclean and unseemly. And so whatever gentleman, asked you out on a date, or which would be rare, it would normally be your husband, would be the one paying for the meal.
I mean, in some ways, you can see how it got that way because even in the U.S., until 1974, women couldn't get a credit card without a husband.
Couldn't have a credit card, which is, I mean, that's to me that is just bonker. I don't know. I'm 43, so I was born in 1980, and I'm like 73. That's nothing. 7 years, that's nothing. So, yeah.
Interesting. What else? What other interesting tales?
Of rage. Well, so there's a few stories behind the stories. So one of the other stories that kind of went bonkers viral, as I like to call it, was a review that I did about a restaurant in Italy called Bros. And I wrote
That's its
this
name?
post. I should have known, right? We should have known. It's called Bros. what were we thinking? So, all right. So the restaurant's called Bros, and we go, and it is, and I wrote about it, and this is the one that like Stephen Colbert did a little segment on, which was, I'm going to say right now, career highlight. So cool. He did not say my name properly. You did. So, gold star for you. It's okay. Honestly, Stephen Colbert could say my last name improperly. I'm still psyched. I would say millions of visitors. The blog broke. I think I got 5 million visitors to the blog in a week. It was on the homepage of the New York Times. It was on Italian press. It was everywhere. The coverage of the by the New York Times, and the coverage, primarily, was so awful. They basically made me out to be this like villainous blogger who wrote this like terrible review. Like I was this, prominent, scathing, powerful writer, which I'm not. Like I sit in a little swivel chair and have a blog. Oh, I shouldn't do that. My camera just lost focus. So, and they made the chef out to be like, I'm just this person from humble beginnings. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like, so then they had quotes from him about like how essentially like I deserve to be punched. Like the New York Times is posting that I deserve physical abuse for what had happened, and then posting his comments about how like I'm too old to appreciate the food. And what it became was every insult that I had ever received as a woman writer, this chef was hurling back at me. And this story in the New York Times, like the front section of the New York Times, was relaying all of that. And that was such a like awful experience. I was like, holy crap, you are painting me as the villain because I wrote a story about having a bad time, a legitimately bad time at this restaurant. It went on. The chef spliced video of me from interviews that I had done and spliced it with like sexually explicit content and put it on his Instagram feed. Like he did a bunch of creepy stuff. And then, there were allegations that he was abusive to his staff that the New York Times did not follow up on, that the story just did not, completely dismissed. And so I was left I was so angry. I was so angry by that entire experience because I was like, you can have what you think is a relatively large amount of power. Like let's be clear. I'm a James Beard award-winning writer. I'm a published author. I have a blog that's being read by millions of people, and I am getting trashed about an experience that was very real. And this guy is, this chef is dragging me through the mud, and the New York Times is just printing it. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. So I'm still, so I get into that entire backstory in the book.
Okay. I'll have to read the book to see how it all turned out.
Yeah. I can send you a copy. Have I not sent you a copy?
No.
Oh God, I'm a goblin. I'm the worst. I'm writing that down right now to send you a copy. All right.
In the last few minutes,
Yes.
talk about how you're marketing the book, like what you are doing as a successful author, as a successful writer, what you are doing to do so in a media landscape that is more crowded than it's ever been, thanks to generative AI. So how is Geraldine going to make this book a success?
Well, so it's funny. I was talking to my husband about this yesterday, and I don't know. He clearly knows who you are. I don't know if your worlds interact. I think they do overlap. So my husband's name is Rand Fishkin. He previously ran a company called Moz. He now runs a company called Spark Toro, and he is, as a friend of mine put it, he's a big old marketing nerd. And he and I were talking yesterday, and he's like, "Look, I can tell you what I know about Gretchen Rubin, and it is that she like forced her book, like The Happiness Project was not destined to be a bestseller, but she forced that book into everyone's hands. She was like, like, read this book, read it." I do not know if I have that verve. I do not know if I do, but I am proud of this project in an intense way, and I would be angry if the stories that inspired this project got more attention than the truth behind it. And this book goes into all the harassment that I dealt with after the blog posts went up, all of the truth behind, like, the New York Times coverage, everything that happened. And I want that out. So what I've been doing is I'm making a list of everyone I know, right? Who do I know in the food world? Who can I reach out to? And just talking to them and being like, "Hey, like, I'd like to send you a copy of this book. I'd like to talk to you about this book. Do you want to pitch an article about it? Do you want to pitch a story? Do you want to do a Q&A or an interview with me? Do you know anyone else who would? Do you have a newsletter you'd want to include this on? Can we have a chat? Like, do you know anyone else who would be interested?" I'm reaching out to everyone who ever did coverage on any of the previous stories. So I talked to people from today.com who did a big coverage of the Bros piece. And I was like, "Hey, can we talk?" I've reached out to people who did coverage of the Batali piece. And I was like, "Hi, I wrote a book about all of the harassment I received in the wake of that. I would love for you to read it. I would love to talk to you about it." So I just went through basically, I still call it the Rolodex because I'm old. And I went through my Rolodex and I was like, "Who can I talk to?" And then I also just, send out the megaphone call, which you answered, which warmed my heart, over social media. And I'm like, "Hey, I have a book and I think it's cool and I think I'm an interesting conversationalist and I make some fun jokes. I would love to talk to you about this book. Call me, like, we'll have a chat. I'll send you a free copy of the book and, we'll get the word out," because I think that food informs who we are, and I think that it's an important topic for women and men and everyone. And, the way in which we've been taught to think about it is kind of messed up. Diet culture is messed up. Food culture is kind of broken. Who's in charge of cooking? Who's allowed to be famous? It's all kind of messed up. And I talk about it in a funny way. And I really want this to do well. So I've just been every outlet, everything. I'm pounding the pavement. I'm driving my publisher insane. That's been my approach. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if it's going to work, but you know what? It can't hurt.
That is true. Given that your average book sells something like 10 copies,
Are
that
you
is true.
serious? I've heard this before.
Yeah, a
That
lot of
is,
books don't do well. For every one that you hear of, there's hundreds, if not thousands, that do not. And it's a very challenged environment right now, to the point where distribution itself is imperiled. If you would like an example, there are a number of articles talking about how Amazon has been deluged with AI generated books, to the point
yes.
where there's millions of these things now.
Yeah, there's a couple written by my husband, not written by my husband, but there's a couple AI books claiming to be written by my husband. Yeah, it's funny too because I don't consider my first book a failure. I loved my first book. I thought it was funny and sweet. You should read it. But All Over the Place, which was my first book, I think sold maybe 18,000 copies. And I'm like, it didn't do that well. Like, that's how I'm like, when I hear 10 copies, I'm like, okay, okay, you're doing okay. You're doing all right. But it's hard. It is hard out there. Everyone I know is having a hard time in journalism, in writing, in publishing, in film, in TV. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard.
So
What do you think? Wait, why I want to hear from you. What do you think people should be doing?
for marketing a book?
Across the board, yeah. Primarily marketing a book. So let me take some notes, but I'm just asking in general.
Everything comes down to two things: brand and collaboration. So you've got to have a brand that people know, because brand is the brand is the sole surviving marketing channel that is reliable in an era when you can talk to, the AI of your choice and get information on anything. Someone asking for you by name is going to find you. Someone asking for an interesting book on food and feminism, AI is not going to recommend you, right? Because there's a gazillion choices. So you have to be known by name. You have to have a community and an audience for that. And then the second aspect is collaboration, because everyone has these little pools of audience, and it's just hopping from pool to pool as much as you can. Can I get to this person's audience? Can I get to this person's audience? Can I and can I bring them together? When you look at collaborations on YouTube, for example, various YouTubers, you'll see the collaborations are always with people who are roughly the same size number of subscribers. I think so. Like Google will appear on Joshua Weissman's channel, for example. Morgan Eckroth will appear on James Hoffman's channel, for example. They all have about the same number of subscribers. So there's that trade back and forth.
So what I'm hearing is I should change my name to Gwyneth Paltrow. That's my takeaway here.
I mean,
and drink a lot of bone broth. Okay, that's what my takeaway is. Am I doing it right? No, that's it. I have you. I'm quoting you specifically as having said that. So that's cool. And everyone should do that. That is the lesson of this entire talk, is drink bone broth and steal someone else's brand. I'm Christopher Penn, and I hope you've enjoyed my show. So yes.
On that note, where can people find it?
People can find this book wherever all fine books and also my book is sold. So you can find it if you go to penguinrandoms.com and you do a search for If You Can Take the Heat. You can go to my website, which is everywhereist.com, and there's branding for it there. If you go to your local bookstore and ask them to order it, they can pre-order it. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. It's honestly everywhere right now. You can find it. You can find it on Indiegogo if you prefer to go the indie route. You can order it from any sort of indie bookseller. And there is the audiobook as well. If you're not sick of listening to my voice, it's narrated by yours truly. So that is where you can find it. But if all of that is too confusing, just go to Everywhereist, which is everywhereist.com.
All right. Thanks for being on the show today.
You kidding? Thanks for having me. This was great.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And if you want to know when new videos are available, hit the bell button to be notified as soon as new content is live.